Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives and those of our children. I'm your host, Richard Wolff. We're going to be covering a number of topics today: organizing by workers at Amazon, the construction industry and deporting immigrants, and finally, a lesson in technology, this time devoted to artificial intelligence. But as usual, before we jump in, three quick, short announcements. One, I want to apologize for having made a mistake recently when I talked about the coincidence of the inauguration of President Trump and the anniversary of Martin Luther King, where I spoke of the anniversary being the anniversary of his assassination. That was a mistake, and I do apologize. It is, in fact, the anniversary of his birth. The contrast between these two remains the point I was trying to make, but I should be more accurate, and I appreciate that many of you wrote in to help me become more accurate. I also want to remind you that our new book, Understanding Capitalism, is a kind of companion piece to this program, and I urge you to make use of it in that way. We'll have a little bit more to say about our special edition copy later on in the program. And finally, I want to remind you that Charlie is available to take your suggestions, which you keep sending in and which are very useful to us. charlie.info438@gmail.com. Okay, let's jump right in. In Garner, North Carolina, that's part of the American South, 4,300 Amazon warehouse workers are having an election to form a union. Unions have been battled by Southerners, particularly, of course, the employers and the politicians they support, which is more polite than saying they own, have been fighting unions for a long time, and for much of that time, fairly successfully. Things are changing now, as they are all across the United States, as the American labor movement revives. It's long overdue, it's urgently needed, and Amazon is one of the flashpoints where it's happening. But beyond that, I want to make a bit of a point, and that's about Amazon. Because the effort to organize Amazon is not only going on across the United States, but it is going on elsewhere too. Amazon is a global multinational corporation. One of the most extreme examples of how far Amazon is prepared to go also happened over the last few weeks. And that was when 2,000 workers at Amazon facilities in Quebec, Canada, discovered after they had elected a union, formed it last April, developed it, sat down, worked out a contract with Amazon, they discovered that Amazon had other plans, which of course they had kept secret. Amazon closed the entire facility, throwing those 2,000 people out of work. Anything is better than having to deal across the table with honest negotiations with a union. Amazon is a ferociously anti-union company, and everyone should know it and think about it and understand to whom you are giving money. Clearly, one person who either doesn't care or doesn't know is President Trump, because there on Inauguration Day, who was sitting literally 5 feet behind the president as he was inaugurated, but the head of the Amazon Corporation. Mr. Trump could not have been clearer in the symbolism of where a government under his leadership stands. Right up front and center, ahead of governors and politicians and dignitaries, is a billionaire, Mr. Bezos, presiding over Amazon. Was there anyone to represent all those Amazon workers put up there, sitting with her husband or his wife? Not a chance. Of course not. The government neutral in the capital labor struggle? Not in the past, not in the present. I want to turn next to the construction industry. The construction industry announced over recent weeks that it will need 400,000 more workers in 2025 to do the construction that is anticipated and for which the money has been set aside mostly by private projects. But here's a problem if we're going to meet that goal. 13% of construction workers, that's 1 out of 7, roughly. 1 out of 7 construction workers is an undocumented immigrant. Mr. Trump is planning to deport millions of them. So they're not going to be available to do the construction work. But in fact, the situation is urgent. Why? Because undocumented workers in construction are more profitable than their native-born counterparts. Why is that? Because an employer facing an undocumented immigrant can do all sorts of illegal, semi-legal, and otherwise outrageous things, like not paying them the full amount agreed to, not paying them on time, making them do overtime without paying them overtime. No matter what they do to that worker cannot go to the police or to the labor authorities or anybody else because they're undocumented and they want to keep as far away from government officials as they know how to get. And the employers, of course, know it and take advantage of it. So a larger than 13% of the profits of the construction industry are based on undocumented workers. That's why they come here, because they can get jobs, because they are eagerly snapped up by employers who see big profits from doing so. And Mr. Trump deporting them is going to shake up the construction industry, make it incapable of growing the way we need it to, and the way many other industries planning capital growth projects, construction projects need. So it's going to, you got it, hurt the U.S. economy, what is being done. It may sound good on TV, I'm the tough guy getting rid of the immigrants, but it's going to hurt the American economy and you and me. And I'm still not done with this story. There's still another dimension of it. What are the construction companies going to do when they see their workers not showing up because they got deported? When they see their profits shrinking because those very profitable workers are the ones being deported? You know what many of them are going to do? Yeah, they're going to raise their prices to recoup what they lost from this deportation. And if construction becomes more expensive, which is what's going to happen, that's going to boost, you got it, the inflation that we're supposed to be fighting in this country. Deported workers, if they're replaced, will cost more and they will bring less profits. And both of those things will boost the prices you and I have to pay. Think about it the next time you hear cheerleading for deportation. Okay, the third thing is a perennial topic, and I've got to go through it again because so many of you are asking me about it. This one concerns artificial intelligence, but it's the same lesson that applied to robots, to computers, to electricity, to everything else. What a new technology does to our society doesn't depend only on the technology itself. It doesn't even depend mainly on that. It depends rather on how and who installs the technology into the production process. In other words, what matters about artificial intelligence is who's going to install it and for what reason. So now let's do it, and let's hope it's the last time I have to. A capitalist employer sees AI or robots or computers or any of it as an opportunity. Let's assume the AI allows workers to become twice as productive, like a machine once did, or like computers once did, etc. Or now, what does the capitalist typically do? He fires half his labor force. Why? He doesn't need them. The remaining half, with the new technology being twice as productive, can produce the same output. The employer now has the same output, sells it in the market. Let's make it simple. At the going price, he earns the same revenue he always did. But his profits are going up because half the wages he had to pay before, he gets to keep. He doesn't have to pay that half because he fired them. So he gets the same money in, produces the same goods, gets the same revenue, but half of the wages he used to have to pay, he gets to keep. Oh boy, he loves the technology. It's made everything profitable for him, much more profitable for him. So that's what he does. He has no responsibility to the half of the workers he fired. They're not his concern, but more importantly, they're not his expense. They have to go off and who knows? And in capitalism, who cares? How could it be otherwise? Easy. Let's suppose a different kind of business, a worker co-op. Here's what the worker co-op would do with the same AI or the same robot or the same computer, doubling everybody's productivity. Here's what the worker co-op would do. It would say to all its members, literally, they would say it to themselves, we got a great new machine. Everybody's workday is going to be cut from 8 hours to 4 hours. You know why? Because in 4 hours, we can produce with this new technology twice as much as we used to take 8 hours to produce. So we'll have the same money coming in, paying us the same wages, paying our outfit the same profit that it always did. But we will have enjoyed a cutting of our work time in half. The leisure of the mass of workers will have been enormously increased. This would be using the technology in a democratic way because the majority, the workers, would want it that way. Only the minority, the bosses, want it to be profit. If you don't like technology, you're misunderstanding. The problem isn't the technology, and it never was. The problem is capitalism because of how it works, including how it uses the new technologies that come along. Don't be fooled. We've come to the end of the first half. Stay with us. We'll be back with a remarkable interview with Serena Martin. Before we jump into the second half of today's show, I wanted to thank you for your very generous response to our fundraising efforts this year, and in particular in the last couple of months. And in part responding to that, we are extending the availability of our limited edition linen covered hardcover version of Understanding Capitalism, the book I wrote and that we have been making available now for quite a while. If you are interested, I will be signing copies of that hardcover, and they will be available to you as they have been over the last few weeks. Just simply send an email to us at info@democracyatwork.info and put in the subject line limited edition. We will send you all the information you need to order and receive your copy, signed copy, of Understanding Capitalism in its hardback. And thank you again for your kind attention to the fundraising dimension of what we do. Welcome back, friends, to the second half of today's economic update. I am very proud and happy to bring to our microphones and to the camera Serena Martin. She is someone I recently met who taught me a lot in a short amount of time, and I want to bring her here to do the same for all of you. She directs the New Hour for Women and Children, an organization empowering incarcerated mothers, women, and children through jail programs and reentry support on Long Island, New York. For many years, she has led carceral reform efforts across New York in many ways. A survivor of isolated confinement, she earned degrees through the college-bound program at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility and at Adelphi University. I asked Serena to join us because I want the perspective of people who have been put through the prison system in this country to be part of the national conversation about our problems and the appropriate solutions, because they have a perspective we don't hear enough of. And I want to remind everyone the United States puts more of its citizens as a share of its population into jails than any other country on earth. So, first of all, Serena, thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Could we begin by telling us briefly about this organization you formed, what its purposes are, its goals?
Absolutely. I'm so honored to be here and got to talk with you a little bit when we were filming at the Women's Building in Brooklyn. And I will say that one of the reasons why New Hour is so important to me, the organization I founded, was really because so many women who had survived incarceration came home, and I liken it to the Vietnam War. You come home and you are completely changed by the trauma, the harm, and the abuse. And so when I founded New Hour, it was really an effort to both heal myself and then also give back and provide women with a safe space to receive support. So that was 2015 that we first founded New Hour.
Can you give me an idea of what it is you want to convey to the American people and to the international audience we have about that experience and what it teaches, or at least what it taught you?
I think that, I was speaking with a young woman this morning, and interestingly, we connected around the issue of seeing our younger selves. I was incarcerated 27 years ago. And so we were young girls. And very often, as women who've been incarcerated, you take the onus on yourself that it was my fault, the accountability, everything is my fault. There's a deep shame and stigma that comes from incarceration for men and women. But most importantly, for women who have survived this, there is a sense of stigma and shame that we don't want to see passed on to our children. I have a 13-year-old now, and I'm thinking a lot about how we impact the justice system, because the truth is that anyone can end up incarcerated. We have a problem with mass incarceration in the US and across this little sort of area of Long Island here, which I always call an ecosystem for what we see across racial divides and economic divides. There are drivers behind, systemic drivers that drive the issue of incarceration, whether it's domestic violence, mental health issues, poverty. Many of us found ourselves incarcerated very young. And I have to tell you, some of the most wonderful people I've ever met were the women who took care of me as a young girl behind bars. And so when I created New Hour, it was an effort to support sisters who had been through the system. You know, my family came from Puerto Rico to Spanish Harlem to Long Island. And I think that in many ways, what I saw behind bars as a young girl, I had just turned 20, was a sea of Latina women, Black and brown women who had been left for dead by our carceral system because the lives of women behind bars matter so little to the general community, and that's heartbreaking to know.
You know, it occurs to me, listening to you, that in European countries that I know rather well, uh, they don't understand the whole incarceration structure here in the United States. At least that's what they say. And they make the argument that in their countries, issues like poverty, issues like mental health, uh, are not handled by the notion of putting a person in jail. That's not what those conditions call for, and that's not what responds effectively or even correctively to those conditions. That we have a bizarre commitment to punishment. You know, in Europe, all all the countries of Europe prohibit the death penalty. They don't have such a thing. They think it is barbaric to do that. They don't put people in jail for long periods of time either when they do. So let me bring out from you a little bit more what you suggested before, that in a sense, your prison experience gives you insights into the larger society's problems. What are some of those? What do you think are, if I can say it this way, the lessons that you learned uh, from your time in jail?
I love to answer this question. I love to think about this question because the programs that we now run at New Hour in our local jails, we've impacted 12,000 women. And most importantly, we've reduced the recidivism rate, the rate at which someone returns to prison or jail, from 65%, which is the average amount of percentage here in our region, to 2%. And the reason that that's possible is because when you give people support, access to food, clothing, transportation, mental health support, a safe community, that is deeply how we heal and support our families and community. It is not lock them up and throw away the key, because the truth is most people who are incarcerated are going to come home. Over 95% of folks behind bars are going to leave and come home. And do you want someone who has received services to come home, or do you want someone who, went in very unwell and came home even more unwell? And so I think that this issue around incarceration, especially incarcerated pregnant women, this is a bill that we're working on in New York State now to end the incarceration of pregnant women, to allow women to have their infants behind bars in a safe nursery space. There's so many co-occurring collateral consequences of the carceral system that you don't think about when it comes to infants, maternal mortality, reproductive health, and overall, what is the trauma left behind for the next generation?
You know, I can't help but ask, Serena. You told me something when we met, a Saturday ago in Brooklyn that has stayed with me ever since, and I must have told 50 people. You told me that in a number of, and correct me if I got it wrong, a number of jails, a newborn child to a woman who's an inmate is taken away from her without her consent, without her permission, and kept separate from her, almost as though it were part of the punishment. Did I get that right? And can you tell me what in the world supports such behavior?
Yes, you got that right, and it is the case. Because there is no state law that requires all infants to remain with their mom when born behind bars, it's up to the local sheriffs in each county to decide what they want to do. And so you may have a good sheriff, a good sheriff as in they'll allow the infant to stay, or you may have a sheriff who doesn't really think or say they have the capacity to support an infant being behind bars with the mother. So the collateral damage is literally that infants have worsened health outcomes because they're not allowed to be with their mom.
It's extraordinary. It suggests an image of punishment that is wildly overdeveloped. I had a thought I want your reaction to. I've always been struck that the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which is the amendment that prohibits slavery, outcome of the Civil War, that it makes an exception. Slavery is outlawed everywhere except as punishment for a crime. That's what it says. And that has been interpreted that the jail can treat you like a slave. And my question to you is, how is it possible that a sane society would think that what you want to do to an incarcerated person should be slavery, that they should be reduced to something so horrible that we fought a civil war and had a constitutional amendment to prevent anyone else from suffering? How could that be thought of as in any way appropriate to a person in a jail?
I will certainly say that for my experience having been incarcerated, you were required to work. I made 11 cents an hour. I burnt my whole wrist working in the kitchen in a steam area without PPE or proper protection. And not only are you required to work for less than any wages, really, if you don't work, if you are not going to your program, you will be put in isolated confinement. You will be punished. And so when we're having conversations now about firefighters with the LA fires who are incarcerated firefighters, many people are saying, well, they're lucky that they get out of their cell. They're lucky to go out into the woods. They're lucky to be a part of the working community. But the truth is, they're doing this without adequate obviously pay, but also without care and conditions that help them to do the job. And the very deep truth is that behind bars are just people, everyday people who've made terrible choices and they want to work. I wanted to work every day because it makes the time go by. I worked for free because, well, for 11 cents an hour, because that is the exception. So slave labor still continues behind bars throughout the United States.
You know, in many countries, that is forbidden because it is considered an exploitative danger to workers outside of jail, that they are now competing with an enterprise that can get away with paying that amount of money. Serena, as happens so
Absolutely.
often, we've run out of time for this interview, but I am looking to see the response of my audience to the things you've said, to the insights you've shared, because I would like to bring you back and continue, because I was struck above all by your statement that one of the goals of your organization is not just to ameliorate the conditions and to facilitate the reentry of formerly incarcerated people, but to make the changes in society that are needed, that have created this population in the first place. So with that in mind, thank you very much for your time, and I will look forward to bringing you back again. Oh, yes, I have to, as always, remember to tell my audience that I also look forward to speaking with them again next week.